Hello everyone and welcome back. This is the Desecrated Infinimist Season 2 build for Necromancer. Now this is the build that I used to get second in the world hardcore SSF in Season 1. And we've been theory crafting very hard over here at MAXROLL, and I can tell you that this build not only is as good as Season 1, it's not only is relatively powerful as Season 1, it's more powerful. And in fact, there are a couple of mechanics that might take it from A tier to S tier. This might actually be one of the best builds for the entire season, across all classes as well, just because of the way some of these new mechanics coming in really impact the build. I want to show you a little bit of gameplay. Of course, this is from Season 1, if you're not already familiar with Infinimist. But really what I want to go into today is the theory craft around Desecrated Infinimist and why it's even called Desecrated Infinimist now, and why this is going to do so much more damage. Now, for those of you familiar with Infinimist, one of the main jobs of the build is to make Blood Mist come off of cooldown constantly. And for that, we throw Decrepify with this modifier on our right click, and we're going to apply that Decrepify to as many enemies as possible. So applying Decrepify manually is a little bit of extra economy that we have to do in this build. However, there's not much more going on besides casting Corpse Explosion, casting Corpse Tendrils on cooldown, and doing one other thing which is new to the build, which is Blood Wave. Now, we are giving up Bone Storm for Blood Wave as our ultimate. This is actually a massive change to the build. This is something I've been playing around actually with since launch, and it really hasn't been good enough yet. Now, Blood Wave, particularly with Ultimate Shadow here, has been doing actually quite good damage. On live right now, I have it ticking for a couple of million per tick over the Blood Wave Desecration effect here on Ultimate Shadow. However, it's just not compelling enough. It's just not really, it doesn't have that spice, and the cooldown can sometimes be very long, sometimes 10, sometimes 20 seconds if you don't quite have enough enemies on the screen or enough blood orbs. Well, all of that is changing. That's all changing. In fact, you may be able to spam Blood Wave in some scenarios. Like in other words, you cast your cooldown and then you immediately cast it again, because it's going to come off of cooldown quite often now with some of the mechanics that we have in Season 2. So let's get into it. Let's just go over all of the gear. First, I want to focus on the legendary powers because there are some that are quite new. Then we'll go into the skills, and then we'll go into the Book of the Dead, and then we'll come back and we'll look at the modifiers on the gear and talk a little bit about why the modifiers have changed. We'll go into the skill tree, and we'll break down the entire skill tree for you, and then I'll go into the Paragon. Now, one thing I should go ahead and mention is that the Diablo 4 planner on MAXROLL hasn't been updated yet. Typically, it takes a little bit of time after the patch drops, and the patch doesn't drop until 10 a.m. on Tuesday, so that might take us a little bit of time. So I do have some placeholders in here. I do have some notes here on some of the changes that we'll get into manually, but you'll be able to slot everything in that I do think is best in slot for this build. The other thing that you'll note before we get into it is that the base form of this build does not include that many uniques. It does include Howl. Howl, in my opinion, still is sort of like a base requirement for the build for it to really start popping off. But aside from that, you're not really unique dependent in this build, which is quite strong. All right, first of all, we have Exploding Mist here. Now this is actually not as important as you might think it is, but this does help with some of the fluidity of the build. And what happens here is when you cast Blood Mist, your Corpse Explosion is going to go off. Now, this is limited in that it only casts a very limited number of Corpse Explosions while Blood Mist is active. The Embalmer Embalmer is really important for this build because we're going to be consuming a lot of corpses. Now, what's great about consuming a corpse to get a blood orb, as opposed to other blood orb mechanics, is that we're going to have basically infinite corpses. Even on bosses, we're going to have a ridiculous amount of corpses. And in fact, in Season 2, we're going to have somewhere in the range of 50% more corpses than in Season 1 because of X-Files. And we'll get to that soon. Hal from Below, you know it, you love it. It's the GOAT. Essentially, this takes Corpse Explosion and turns every single Corpse Explosion into a homing missile. It makes a skeleton come up from the dead. They charge at a random enemy automatically. There's nothing that you have to do, no interaction there. You don't have to like control them or anything. It also increases corpse explosion damage by a 40x multiplier. But actually one of the most important modifiers here is the corpse skill attack speed. I do want to talk a little bit about corpse skill attack speed and how we can generate enough corpses to sort of saturate our attack speed a little bit later. All right, Disobedience. Disobedience is not as strong as it used to be. Obviously, armor got changed with the new elemental resistances changes. However, it's still extremely strong. And we have actually an open slot here because we're not using Shielding Storm in this build. So using Disobedience is super smart. Now, Ghostwalker returns for this build. This is definitely the best in slot boot aspect. And this is really important because one of the Vampiric Powers that we're going to get gives you Unstoppable, and then this will give you movement speed. So essentially, you're going to have Ghostwalker up almost all the time this season, as opposed to last season where it felt more like a burst of speed in between engagements. You're going to have Ghostwalker up much, much more often. All right, let's go to the weapon slot. We have Ultimate Shadow here on a wand. Now, wand is really important because it has a lot of attack speed and it has an implicit lucky hit chance. But actually the most important thing that we care about here is the Blood Wave Desecration effect, and the fact that Blood Wave becomes a darkness skill. Those two things are very important. This is really core to the build. If you get rid of this, you can no longer really do the build in any sort of capacity. This is a major source of your damage. Now for the offhand, surprisingly, we are not using a shield. We're using a focus. Now the focus is going to have cooldown reduction as an implicit. It's going to have cooldown reduction as one of the modifiers. That's of course super, super important, and we'll talk more about that here in a second when we're talking about Blood Wave. But Blood Wave is going to fire 2 additional waves. Now, this does mean that each wave does less damage, but this is actually significantly more damage, and it sort of spreads the damage out over a cast time. This also gives Blood Wave more blood orbs. So instead of generating 3 blood orbs, we're going to generate 9 blood orbs. So overall, the tidal aspect here is very impactful on our Blood Wave casts, and we're going to be casting Blood Wave quite a lot. All right, let's get into the jewelry. We're going to run Blighted. This is essentially just a 180x global modifier to all of our damage anytime Shadow Blight triggers. We're going to be using Blood Soaked. Blood Soaked is very important for movement speed, especially early on. There is a chance that we actually swap this out with X-Files later on. X-Files is going to be, I think, pretty difficult to get. It's one of the new uniques. And there's a chance this is Desecrated Ground. We're going to talk about Desecrated Ground here in a bit. And then we're using Fast Blood. This is using blood orbs to reduce your ultimate cooldown. This is really key and works with the aforementioned Embalmer aspect in order to really get that ultimate as far down to 0 on that cooldown as possible. All right, now let's take a look at the skills. Of course, we're using Corpse Tendrils. You'll want to cast this on cooldown. Essentially, I just slam the Q key here even when it is on cooldown so that it just automatically casts when it's off cooldown. It's so good. It's one of the best CCs in the game. And I actually have the wrong aspect here allocated. We're going to be using Blighted Corpse Tendrils for those extra blood orbs. That's going to be really important. We're going to actually be getting vulnerable from a different source this season. So that's really important. Corpse Explosion, this is our main damage skill. And of course we're using the Blighted Corpse Explosion, which turns Corpse Explosion into a darkness skill and leaves damage over time on the ground. We're going to be using Blood Wave. Blood Wave is going to be a huge source of our damage. And in fact, eventually, once you get enough cooldown, it even becomes your main source of damage. That's going to take you quite a while. You're probably going to be level 100 or close to level 100 before that happens. But until then, Corpse Explosion plus Howl from Below is definitely going to be your main damage. Blood Mist, of course. Blood Mist lets us travel very, very quickly. It makes us invincible. When we have Blood Soaked, it doesn't reduce our movement speed. It does all sorts of wonderful things for us. And one really important thing is that it's a macabre skill. And it being a macabre skill means that it's going to cast the Accursed Souls for us, which is part of the new season mechanic. So actually you're going to activate Blood Mist here to cast those Accursed Souls. Those Accursed Souls aren't going to do a significant amount of damage, I don't think. We actually don't know what their base damage in game is quite going to be yet. However, if you do want to get that damage, you do want to cast those Accursed Souls, this is the way that you're going to be doing it. Now, you might be surprised to see Golem here on my left click. I use Blood Golem, and I've been using this quite often. This is something I don't see in a lot of people's Necromancers builds. And it reduces 15% of the damage that you would take. Now, you might look at this and go, oh, well, that's just 15% damage reduction, which is actually incorrect. It's more, depending on how much damage reduction you have, it's more about 30% damage reduction. So this is actually quite strong, but essentially this factors into the damage received equation in a different spot, and therefore it's kind of like comparing multiplicative versus additive in the sense that this is a lot stronger than you think that it is. The other thing is that keeping the Blood Golem alive is actually pretty easy. Blood Orbs now automatically heal your Blood Golem. The Blood Golem is going to do 100% more damage than it did before, and its attack is going to do, I can't remember, I think it was 40% or something more damage. So this active and having this active on left click, which by the way, this is just how I like to do it, is I click and move with left click, and then sometimes I'll click the golem and the golem will just automatically attack something. So having it on left click here is super handy for me because I don't really even have to think about telling the Blood Golem to attack. All right, let's look at the Book of the Dead. Now, first of all, we're going to take, this is actually wrong, we're going to take Skeletal Defender's Sacrifice. Now, this has been buffed to 20% all res, and it's one of the strongest forms of all res that you can really get. Resistance is going to be really important in the new season, and it's actually a lot harder to stack capped resistance than I think they made clear on some of the development streams. So grabbing this is going to be just going to get you that much closer to hitting that resistance cap. I think this is probably going to be a best in slot for most, if not all builds, and I doubt you're going to be removing this until you are really min-maxing your build way past level 100, and you are probably going to swap it out for something like, crit chance or shadow damage. Now, for the cold damage, we're gonna go with Cold Skeletal Mages, which does 15x increased damage to vulnerable enemies. For reasons that you're gonna see very soon here, we're gonna have vulnerable on all enemies all the time. It's gonna be very easy to get this. So this is quite strong. And then of course we're gonna take the Blood Golem here. Another good reason for taking the Blood Golem is that we're no longer really reliant on Shadow Blight for our damage in this build. So the options that we get for sacrificing here, 10% additive attack speed, 10% multiplicative maximum life, or 30% increased crit strike, don't actually really help us that much because most of our damage is going to be coming from damage over time now, as opposed to critical strike. That's actually one of the big changes for this build for this season, is that instead of trying to proc instead of trying to proc Ultimate Shadow over and over and over again, which is then procking Shadow Blight over and over and over again and focusing on the Shadow Blight crit damage, we aren't really going to do that anymore. We're just going to focus on our raw dot damage. There's a couple of changes there that make that really, really strong. X-Files is one, but another one is that Shadow Blight itself is changing so that 100% of your shadow damage over time actually gets added into Shadow Blight. So you're smuggling your shadow damage over time now into your actual damage. All right, let's jump up and talk about one of the main damage dealers of this class now, which is Blood Wave. Now, a lot of you probably haven't been using Blood Wave, particularly with Ultimate Shadow. I know there are some really esoteric builds out there that are doing it, but nobody's really advertised this in sort of like a big way. Now, the way that this works is this has a 50-second cooldown, which is a lot to work through. But when you start looking at all of your cooldown sources, this 50 seconds starts becoming a hurdle that you can overcome. You get 14% cooldown on the, you get 14.6% cooldown on the helm. You get double cooldown, 10% and 14% on the offhand. Then you're going to get cooldown from your blood orbs. You're going to get cooldown from the new Vampiric Powers. I believe it's the Anticipation. Anticipation is just going to give you 20% raw ultimate cooldown. And then there's a new unique called Flicker Step that when you evade through enemies, that just for every enemy that you evade through, that reduces your ultimate cooldown by 2 seconds. So you're going to be generating tons of blood orbs. Those are each going to be reducing that ultimate cooldown. You're going to have a lot of cooldown. And this Blood Wave is actually going to be up more often than you might think. In fact, the way that it kind of works is that because you're not picking up those blood orbs automatically, you'll probably go into an engagement, cast Blood Wave. It's going to do tremendous amounts of damage. It's going to screen wipe things. And because of the title aspect, it's actually going to cast 3 times. Now, when you cast it 3 times, it internally generates 9 total blood orbs. So each blood orb there is 9 times 1.5 with the fast blood cooldown. So it automatically reduces its own cooldown just by casting it. This is why if you have enough cooldown, you can eventually, at the very upper echelons of gear and super min-max at level 100 or whatever, you can eventually probably cast Blood Wave almost on spam, almost nearly constantly. And what's really nice about this, what I really love about this, the way it actually plays out, is your blood orbs are actually going to sit on the ground, right? So you're going to cast Blood Wave, and then you're going to start casting your corpse explosions, or you're going to cast Blood Mist because you're in danger or whatever. When you start casting your corpse explosions, you're going to explode more corpses. That's going to generate more blood orbs, and you're going to have all these blood orbs everywhere. Then you're going to look at your Blood Wave cooldown, and it's probably not off cooldown yet. And so all you have to do is run around and pick up as many blood orbs as you want until Blood Wave is off cooldown again, and then cast it again. So essentially, you can kind of a la carte cast Blood Wave whenever you want to cast it, because the blood orbs will be sitting on the ground just waiting for you to consume them. So you can kind of choose when you want Blood Wave off of cooldown, which is pretty nice. A lot of times that means that you're going to go into, particularly like, let's say you're doing Helltide, you're going to go into one engagement, you're going to cast Blood Wave, it's going to kill everything on the screen, you're going to pick up all the blood orbs, and it'll be off cooldown for the next engagement almost immediately. So this is going to be really strong, particularly because of Desecrated Ground. Now, let's jump over. I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit and talk about one of the new sigils, which is called Desecration. One thing that is super important here is that this is 59.4% additive, which is a crazy amount. Typically, the most additive damage that you see is something like Exhumation here, which increases all corpse skills by 13.9%. So 59.4% additive is quite huge. And of course, you multiply that by 12, and you're somewhere in the 600% additive damage range. More if you want to throw it on Flesh Eater. So Desecration here is quite strong. It is very, very good. And the question becomes, what is Desecrated Ground anyway? Let's go look. So this is something, because we can't actually go in game right now and test this out. It's not in the game yet. We have to theorycraft. We have to pretend that we understand what's going to happen in the game, because we're just going off of the tooltips, right? So the very first thing here is the Grim Wand of Ultimate Shadow. And if you read the tooltip very closely, you'll see that Blood Wave, lowercase, desecrates the ground it travels over. So there's a good chance that Blood Wave causes a desecrated ground. Now, when you cast Blood Wave in this way, it gives the same sort of a visual effect that Blighted Corpse Explosion has, right? So let's go take a look at Blighted Corpse Explosion, because the tooltip here reads very differently. So you see, Blighted Corpse Explosion says, release a vile miasma from a corpse, dealing shadow damage over 6 seconds. So that doesn't say create desecrated ground. So what is vile miasma equal to desecrated ground? Because the visual effect is exactly the same as Ultimate Shadow's desecrated ground. So if desecrated ground only impacts Blood Wave, then it's quite mediocre and maybe not that good. But if it also impacts Corpse Explosion, then it's gonna be really, really strong. Now there's another effect, it's Blood Soaked, that gives the same visual on-ground effect as Blighted Corpse Explosion and Ultimate Shadow Blood Wave, and that's the Blood Mist Trail here. So the Blood Mist Trail has the same impact. And you'll see, by the way, that all these effects are shadow damage per second, right? So Blood Soaked is shadow damage per second. Ultimate Shadow is shadow damage over 4 seconds. Blighted Corpse Explosion is shadow damage over 6 seconds. So mechanically and visually, these are operating the same. But the tooltip doesn't say here desecrated ground. It says it leaves a trail. A trail of what? It doesn't really specify. Now, there is one other mechanic that actually specifies desecrated ground, and that actually is the Greaves of the Empty Tomb. And this is actually the only thing in the entire game that says desecrated ground as a thing, but it's actually lowercase too. So it's not a proper noun in this on this item. So I'm not sure Blizzard got this correct in terms of the concept of what desecrated ground is, in terms of like how the tooltips are worded right now, and they might have to go back and fix some of the tooltips if we observe the behavior. Now, based on the sort of functional behavior that I see in the game, my current copium is that Blood Wave with Ultimate Shadow will work, that Sever Boots will work, that Blighted Corpse Explosion will work, and that the Blood Soaked Ring will work. That all of these effects will work. I think they all count as desecrated ground. And specifically, there are some effects that don't have a visual on-ground effect. So, for example, the Bone Storm shadow damage from Ultimate Shadow, if you use Bone Storm, doesn't cast shadow damage over time on the ground as that effect. So I would not expect it to work with that, but I would expect it to work with Blood Wave. So that's just a little aside about what desecrated ground is. So the theorycraft for this could change pretty dramatically depending on what desecrated ground actually means. All right, we talked a little bit already about some of these new sigils, Exhumation and Desecration here. Now, Exhumation is just a pure buff for the class. It increases the corpse skills damage additively. This is additive, by the way, for each intelligence point that you take in range. And this is really key. Necromancer has always had a lot of trouble sort of saying capped on Fortify, and this makes it very, very easy to stay 100% capped on Fortify forever. You're going to get 4% max life per corpse that you explode. And if you've played Infinimist, or if you've played my version of it, then you know that you are just sitting there holding your corpse explosion key on your keyboard almost all the time. And so you are just generating 4% Fortify constantly. There's a constant sort of tap of 4% Fortify at all times. This is actually really, really strong. And what this means is that now you can stack damage reduction while fortified, which previously, even though you could get Fortify in the class, you couldn't get it sort of reliably enough in order for it to really matter, right? Now you can get it, and the great thing about damage reduction while fortified is that it's always up, and it's another way that you can sort of gear out your armor, and it makes gearing out the class just a lot easier by having that one extra affix available to you. All right, we already talked a good bit about desecration. If this works the way that we think that it works, the only question is where you're going to stick it. Scent of Death is very strong. Flesh Eater is very strong. One thing that's really important is that Scourge and Darkness are now int-based glyphs. So you have quite a bit more int available to you on the various different boards, and we're going to show you that when we get to the Paragon here shortly. So these actually just straight up get stronger. So Scourge and Darkness now are going to do even more damage than before, because you're going to be able to allocate more intelligence towards them as opposed to willpower that you had previously. Okay, let's get into the Vampiric Powers. Now, the way that I see it, there are basically 5 guaranteed Vampiric Powers that fit into this build. I don't really see much room for swapping these out. These are just too good to change. So, of course, first of all, we have Anticipation. This gives you a 20% cooldown on your ult, which we already talked about, that Blood Wave being extraordinarily powerful in this build now. And it's going to give you 18% damage per enemy stacking. So this is quite strong here. We'll get the actual wording here. Ultimate skills gain 12% increased damage for each nearby enemy affected by your damage over time effect. So this extra damage is not as strong because it's reliant on nearby enemies. So it's not every enemy on the screen, it's nearby. And if you don't know what the range of nearby is, that's about the range of the distance of the waypoint. If you go into town and look at how big the waypoint is, it's not that big, right? So this isn't the end all be all that it is. Really, you just want this for the 20% cooldown reduction. That's really where this is helping you out. Now, Accursed Touch is really strong. This is automatically going to spread Vampiric Curse to all of the enemies around you. It's pretty easy because you're already a lucky hit build, and your Accursed Souls are going to do increased damage. I don't really think the Accursed Souls are going to be super important to the build, but they're there and they're going to do something. They might be good for, killing some minions or helping out when Helltide or something like that. Metamorphosis, I think almost every single build in the season is actually going to be running Metamorphosis. This basically turns your evade into an unstoppable proc. When you evade, you turn into a cloud of bats, becoming unstoppable for 4 seconds. Enemies along your path take 160 physical damage and are inflicted with Vampiric Curse. So you're going to be doing damage with your evade, which is very interesting. You're going to be evading through enemies. You're going to be giving them Vampiric Curse. And of course, the main reason why you take this is to grab Unstoppable. And of course, Unstoppable is generating Ghostwalker. So now when your Blood Mist might be down, you can always pop your evade to metamorphosize and go as fast as humanly possible. You're going to be running like a freight train. This is going to be really, really strong. All right, Flowing Veins. This is basically the only vampiric power that's really helping us out with damage. You get 60% increased damage over time to enemies that are moving or affected by a Vampiric Curse. So this is why it's important to get Accursed Touch or Metamorphosis to apply that Vampiric Curse, because we want 60% increased damage over time. Now, we actually don't know if this is multiplicative or not. If it is multiplicative, if it's just 60% multiplicative, then that's quite good. This is definitely best in slot. If it is 60% additive, that's pretty middling, right? It's okay, but we might actually swap Flowing Veins out at that point for something else if we discover that this is just additive. So it doesn't really say which one is which. It's hard to know. But if it does multiply all of our damage over time by 60%, then that's quite good. And then finally, Pray the Weak. Pray the Weak is going to give us guaranteed vulnerable. And in fact, this is where we're going to get all of our vulnerability from the build on. You do 16% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. Enemies are vulnerable while affected by a vampiric curse from your other vampiric powers. So getting them that vampiric curse is going to be important because vampiric curse equals vulnerable equals 60% dot damage. So those two things are analogous. They're basically the same thing in our build here. Now there's a couple of new uniques to talk about. I want to talk about those very briefly. They are probably going to be very difficult to acquire. I doubt that you're going to get these until you're level 100 or near level 100. So first of all, we have Flicker Step. Flicker Step is a boot. It goes on your boot slot. And so you're going to be giving up Ghostwalker, and you're not going to be replacing Ghostwalker to get this. What that means is that you're going to be moving slower. However, Flicker Step is there to reduce that ultimate cooldown that you have on Blood Wave. So really this is for damage purposes. This is more something that you might swap into on a boss, something that you might swap into when you're running a really high nightmare dungeon that you need that extra damage on. And so every enemy that you evade through, you're gonna reduce that ultimate cooldown by 2. It's pretty strong. In fact, if I roll up here, yeah, each enemy you evade through reduces your active ultimate cooldown by 2 to 4 seconds up to 10 seconds. Sorry, I misspoke. It's not 2 seconds. It's 4 seconds because you're going to get the max roll on your Flicker Step, of course. So 4-second ult cooldown, that might not seem like a lot, but as you start adding all of these different pieces of cooldown together, you're going to get your Blood Wave down to the 10-15 second cooldown range, and getting even just one enemy, even just a boss, getting 4 seconds off of that is enormously huge. Of course, you're also getting procs from Decrepify on top of that. So Flicker Step is really going to allow you to cast Blood Wave, pick up a couple blood orbs, hit evade, and cast Blood Wave again. It's gonna get pretty nutty, I think. Hopefully the affixes on it are good. We don't know what these unique affixes are, by the way. X-Files Corroded Signet. This is going to do 50% dot damage. This is a ring. And why this is really, sorry, this doesn't do 50% dot damage. What am I thinking? Your damage over time effects have a 50% chance to erupt, dealing 5 to 6 damage of the same type to nearby enemies. Okay, so you say 5 to 6 damage, that's not that great. Why do I care about this ring? Well, it's because of the way that this passive works. This passive is everything to this build. Hued Flesh. So Lucky Hit, your damage has a 12% chance to create a corpse at the target location. So what that means is that every time you do damage, regardless of its source, you have that 12% chance to create a corpse at the target location. And so if you have X-Files here, and X-Files truly is doing a eruption on all of your damage over time effects, then effectively you get to multiply all of the Hued Flesh procs that you get by about 50%. That means that not only do you get this nice little damage buff, which we probably don't care about. We probably actually have enough damage in this build at this point to kill anything. But what we do care about is getting more corpses. Getting more corpses is very good in Infinimist, because one thing that I mentioned that I would talk about is getting corpse saturation. So one thing that you're going to be, when you really get to sort of like the upper echelons of making a build, is that you want to think about action economy. And action economy basically means there's only so much time that you have to cast your skills, right? So we could have 6 active skills on the bar, but you're not going to have time to actually cast all 6 of those skills. Instead, what you want to do is you want to focus as much as possible on one good damaging skill, and you want to make sure that that one good damaging skill does as much damage as possible, so that all you have to do is spam that one damaging skill. And occasionally maybe you cast some other skills off of cooldown or something because they're stronger, that's why they're on a cooldown, blah blah blah, right? So essentially you get a certain amount of time to cast that skill as much as possible. And in our case, it's Corpse Explosion. This is our main damage skill for this build. And the number of times we can cast Corpse Explosion is not dependent on our resource. This is a very different kind of build. We don't actually use resource at all. We use corpses on the ground, right? So if we don't have corpses on the ground, we can't cast Corpse Explosion. And if we have so many corpses on the ground that our attack speed can't keep up with the corpse generation, then we actually need more attack speed. So this gets really interesting, and I was mentioning earlier that corpse attack speed on Howl from Below is very, very important, because when you have X-Fouls, there's a pretty good chance, I think there's a pretty good chance that your corpse generation is either going to completely saturate your Corpse Explosion cast time, or it'll get very close to it, right? So if you get X-Fouls, you might start looking around for some more sources of attack speed in order to make sure that Corpse Explosion can do as much damage as possible, so that you can get as many stacks of Blighted Corpse Explosion onto enemies, or cover the screen in as much miasma / desecrated ground as possible. That's going to be, I think, pretty important here for the build. All right, let's finally get into the skill tree. Now, for our basic skill, we don't really care what we take. Typically, I put this into Reap. Reap is a good basic skill that sometimes you'll see in the build with the Might aspect, particularly because you can form a corpse with it. We're going to be forming corpses a lot more reliably with Hewed Flesh. We're required to put an extra point here. You can put this point into Unliving Energy, or if you are actually using Reap for some reason, you can put it over here into Alkalites Reap. And then finally we get down here. We're going to put 5 and 5 into Blood Mist, and to make sure that Blood Mist is off cooldown as much as possible, we're going to go all the way up to Ghastly Blood Mist to make sure that we get those extra corpses so that we can generate onto new packs of enemies immediately. Corpse Explosion is going to be maxed out. This is actually really important, and in fact in season 1 and at launch, there was some back and forth as to whether Corpse Explosion's damage was actually important. The damage over time from Corpse Explosion now is very, very important. This is definitely going to be the way to play the build, particularly with some of the new glyphs that we're getting. Of course, you want to take Blighted Corpse Explosion. We only take 1 point into Grim Harvest, and then 3 into Fueled by Death. We're going to grab 3 out of 3 Death's Embrace and Amplified Damage. We're going to take 1 point into Decrepify and go into Aberrant Decrepify so we can get that cooldown reduction. That is the namesake of the build, getting that Infinimist. We're going to go into Reaper's Pursuit, 3 of 3, because we want that movement speed, 3 of 3 Gloom, and 3 of 3 Terror, which, by the way, Terror now does now affects all skills that do shadow damage. So it's actually quite stronger, because not everything that does shadow damage is a darkness skill. A good example of this is Shadow Blight itself. Terror was actually not increasing Shadow Blight's damage, so it does now. And then we take 1 point into Crippling Darkness. A lot of this has to do with boss stagger. So we don't need to take the full 3 out of 3 points. We just want to get the proc of the stun. We don't necessarily care about the duration of the stun. All right, then we're going to take 4 out of 5 for Corpse Tendrils, so we can cast it more often. We're going to take Blighted Corpse Tendrils. Now, Blighted Corpse Tendrils is one of the best ways to get additional blood orbs. It generates a ridiculous amount of blood orbs. So even though you're going to be generating quite a few blood orbs from Embalmer, a good half of your blood orb generation is also going to come from Blighted Corpse Tendrils. It's pretty important. Of course, we're going to be taking Blood Wave. We talked a lot about that, all the way up to Supreme Blood Wave. We're going to be taking Stand Alone and Memento Mori, 3 out of 3. And of course, we're going to be taking Shadow Blight. Shadow Blight is just going to be an extremely huge amount of damage. let's talk about Paragon. I'm going to pull the window open a little bit more here. So this, by the way, is not completely min-maxed. We don't know how some of the new glyphs are going to impact things. The boards themselves might actually look a little bit different, depending on how accurate the patch notes are. Sometimes things aren't in patch notes. But one of the things that you will see on these boards here is that we're actually wrapping around and grabbing a lot more of these resist all nodes. This is definitely a new thing that you're going to start seeing in pretty much every single build. Resist all is very strong on Paragon, whereas the single resists are not really that strong in comparison. By the way, if you want to get this build or any of my other builds, you'll want to go over to my Discord server. Now, my Discord has a new channel here that is going to have all of my planners, build videos, MAXROLL guides, and so on. So if you want to see this Desecrated Infinimist build, for example, you'll be able to go in here, click on this, and this will always be up to date. I update this for myself, and so if there's any sort of like changes to Desecrated Infinimist, you'll actually see them there in my Discord. You can check out the link in the description below. Now, I do have Amplify here for now. This is actually just a placeholder until the guide gets the new exclamation and desecration nodes. I think there's a good chance that this is where I put exclamation. And I'll tell you why is that there's a good number of intelligence nodes here already. I don't even know if I'll have enough points to take all of them, but exclamation might be what lands here. Then we're gonna go up to the Wither board. One thing about Wither is that Wither actually scales with intelligence, and a min-maxed sort of necromancer can have north of 1,000 intelligence. So this is gonna do quite a bit more damage than it does now. And we're also focusing a lot more on shadow damage over time. So Wither is way, 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 way more important than it is today. And actually what's really funny is that the path through Wither really doesn't change much. There's maybe some details in here that are very different, like this node. Sometimes you would like skip this node because you could skip it on the pathing because the shadow damage over time there wasn't significant. Now you take that. So there's some little bits like that have been changed here. Another good example here is that we actually go and grab this 24% shadow resistance. It's just really easy to grab it. And it's giving us 10 ent on top of that, but you know, like some of these things are very, very, very easy to grab. We're gonna actually exit the Wither board from two directions. First, we're gonna go out to Flesh Eater. Flesh Eater is a really important board. First of all, it does a 40x modifier that you're gonna have up at all times. It's super important to get Flesh Eater. It's going to do some extra crit damage and that sort of thing, which we do use crit for Shadow Blight. Crit is not important, but it's just not as important as it was before. And then this board is actually the most intelligence we have on any board. It has 75 intelligence. Currently I have control in here. I might actually end up swapping this out for the new Desecrated Glyph. However, we don't really know, again, we don't know what desecrated ground actually means in this. One other thing I might end up doing here, if I optimize a little bit here, is actually pick up some of these resist alls here. They're pretty easy to pick up. It kind of depends on how the build actually ends up getting min-maxed after the patch and how certain things that might not be in the patch notes get laid out. Then we're going to be taking Scent of Death. I think this is going to be end up being the Darkness board. And again, Darkness is going to scale off of intelligence. You can ignore the fact that the willpower isn't allocated here. It's going to be intelligence based. Of course, taking crit is very, very good even for Shadow Blight. Shadow Blight's still going to do quite a lot of damage. And then we're gonna go over here, pick up the Glyph socket, and pick up the intelligence, and just kind of go through the board. Pick up Scent of Death, the 15% DR is quite good, and then exit the board. And then we're gonna pick up Bone Graft. Now, Bone Graft is a very interesting board. It has a lot of intelligence in a very small space. It says 70 intelligence. Right now, I don't actually have enough points here to actually pick up the last, 20 points of intelligence. So there is a chance here that depending on how the build gets min-maxed, some of these crit strike nodes, or crit strike damage nodes, might actually get deprioritized. And if they do, then the places that that's going to go is into all resist, or it's going to go over here and pick up some of these sort of like stray intelligence nodes, so that we can boost our final glyph, which is probably going to end up being Scourge or Darkness or Exhumation, depending on how the min-max ends up working. But in general, this is really what the shape of the board is going to end up looking like. Some of these very minor details post-launch might change just a little bit, but I doubt the boards are going to change. These have already been heavily theory crafted through launch and season 1, so we already know what most of the best stuff already is, and even the order that you want to put it in. Like, for example, how important Flesh Eater is, how important Wither is, and so on and so forth. All right. We have one more thing to talk about in this build, and that is some of the modifications on gear. Now, for your helm here, you're going to be looking at cooldown, maximum life, and total armor. Now, this last piece here, this poison resistance that I have here, I really like having 5 single resistances of each type. And sort of let me break down that for you real quick. So on Helm, I like putting poison resist because I would really like to use Andariel's Visage. It has attack speed and it has poison resistance, and it gives that Nova, of course. So I go ahead and put poison res here, sort of in anticipation that I might use Andariel's. Then the other place that you're going to, well, this would be like Shadow, right? Okay. The other place that you're going to have resistances that's going to be very huge is your boots. So your boots you can't really get very good stats on your boots. So in terms of opportunity cost, getting triple resistance boots is going to be, I think, a meta for almost every class. You'll want to get movement speed, and then you'll want to get three resistances that you don't already have. That might be fire, shadow, lightning, or cold. And what's nice about that is that then over here on your jewelry, you'll notice that this is a 59.8. They actually buffed single resistances to 65%. So technically, this number is wrong right now. The planner still needs to get updated for post patch. But what that means is that you can come over here to your sockets, and single resist sockets for royals are now 30% resistances. So like, for example, let's say this rolled fire, shadow, lightning, then you get sort of like the flexibility to slot in whatever you want over here. So it's a little bit easier to come over here and then just make 2 royal sapphires, and that's 60% res right there. So right off the bat here, if you go single res on helm, triple res on boots, and then you do 2 of a single res on jewelry here, you get 60 to 65% resistance for all res automatically allocated to all your gear. And then you put a little bit of all res in other places, and you're already going to be all res capped. And in fact, you can go over your all res cap with certain mechanics that allow you to have more maximum resistance, or it also allows you to sort of shore up against things like resistance breakers in Nightmare Dungeons. So that's just a little bit about resistances. I don't want to go too deep on it. Let's keep going through the armor. So here we're going to actually, thought I had changed this to fortified instead of damage. Yeah, there we go. So instead of damage reduction from close, we're going to get damage reduction while fortified. And the reason is that damage reduction while fortified works for both close and far away enemies, and it's also going to be up all the time with our new glyph. So we're going to have fortify pretty much constantly. We want to make sure we get total armor, damage reduction, and this is probably the most impactful stat for this in terms of survivability for this entire build is damage reduction from enemies that are affected by shadow damage over time. We have to work on the tooltip there I think Blizzard could make that a little bit more economical in terms of words there, but yeah, that can roll up to 17.4%, which is quite strong. Then on, of course, Howl from Below is just going to roll what it's going to roll. It's unique. On legs here, we're going to grab damage reduction. We're going to grab 4 ranks to Corpse Explosion. Corpse Explosion damage is going to be more important than ever before. Damage reduction from enemies that are affected by shadow damage over time. And total armor. And then, of course, on boots, like we talked about, movement speed is more important than anything else. If you have boots that have movement speed and have no other relevant stats, then take those boots. Those are really, really important to grab. And then triple resist. I'm playing around with max evade charges here because the new Vampiric Power is essentially going to turn Ghostwalker into movement speed from that Vampiric Power. So I don't know if I necessarily want actually the movement speed. I might have the evade charges or the evade cooldown. I might prefer those on this patch. I'm not exactly sure quite yet. I think I'm gonna have to play it to really decide 100%. So if we go on, oh, I thought I had changed this. Maybe I just didn't save my changes. So damage over time here. So instead of crit damage, we're going damage over time. That's basically the main change is that we're going damage over time, vulnerable damage, damage to affected by shadow damage over time enemies and close enemies. Now we still are going to be running this kind of where enemies are grouped up and we're on top of them. This isn't Bone Spear where we're always, you know, as far away from enemies as possible, right? So damage to close is still quite strong here. All right, let's go over to the neck. We're going to get +3 fueled by death. There's a couple of other things that you could get here, like amplify. So this one isn't, or even terror. So this one isn't quite as important to get this particular skill rank modifier, but there is only one skill rank modifier slot here. So I like getting fueled by death if that's the one that I can get, but it's not super important. But what is super important is damage reduction from enemies that are affected by shadow damage over time, movement speed, and shadow damage over time. Those are really important. Particularly the movement speed, I find, especially early on as you're leveling, can be very, very impactful. It gets you across those dungeons and those empty areas quite a bit faster. Let's take a look at the rings. We want to take damage over time, shadow damage, critical strike, chance, and maximum life. And you might say, critical strike, chance, why are we taking crit things? Aren't we a damage over time build? Well, we still have Shadow Blight, and Shadow Blight can still crit. Shadow Blight is a pretty confusing aspect, I think, of these builds, but it still does quite a lot of damage, and having the chance to crit increased is still very, very strong. So we're still gonna take crit chance. One of these days, maybe we don't need crit, but we can still crit on that, and that's going to be still pretty strong. Now, if you don't get crit chance for some reason, there is an alternative that you can get here that's quite good, which is this one. Damage to affected by shadow damage over time enemies. It can go up to 21% on an additive modifier here, so that's still pretty strong. I still prefer crit chance for that extra times 50 multiplier. And then of course the second ring is the same thing. The offhand, we're going to get cooldown as the implicit, and we're going to get cooldown as the main modifier. Those are the two main important things. But then we're also going to be grabbing lucky hit chance. This is actually the only place that we're going to explicitly be getting lucky hit chance as a modifier on the build, aside from the lucky hit chance on Howl from Below and the lucky hit chance implicit on the wand. Those tend to be, they're sort of a lucky hit chance breakpoint. I don't want to get too deep into theorycraft, but the 16.5 from the gloves, the 15 from the wand, and the 9 that you can get here basically get you to the level where adding more lucky hit chance doesn't help you nearly as much with corpse generation in terms of trading off for things like survivability or cooldown reduction. And then of course we're going to take damage reduction from enemies that are affected by shadow damage over time, and damage reduction while fortified on those modifiers. All right, everyone, that's it for this build video. I really hope you're looking forward to season 2 and that Desecrated Infinimist is on your mind. I hope that this is going to be super helpful for your Necromancer build going into Season 2, and that you're going to be blasting right along aside from me. Make sure that if you're not, subscribe down there somewhere below the video. And of course, go over to my Twitch channel at twitch.tv/echohack and follow there as well. I'm going to be live streaming when the season goes live at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, which will be racing with everybody else in the world. And I'm probably going to be running this build. This is looking to me like the best racing build. So I'm looking forward to it, and I hope to see you then. Have a good one. Peace.